Hello, welcome to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life, and we're talking about two weird slates we've got tonight. I don't think there's any place that you can really find custom contests or even any money worth playing unless you want to make a head-to-head against somebody on draft day or something like that. But either way, with only 4 games on the night slate, we'll go ahead and discuss that turbo slate in the middle, starting at 335 as well, for you to give you some extra content. If you want to go after some GPPs, I assume you're not going to be playing cash games on that 2-game slate, but if that's the way you want to go, then you go for it. Either way, the 335 game is going to be Detroit at Oakland, and Scott Kazmir is a minus 151 favorite, it looks like, and Alfredo Simon's been scratched, and it looks like, is this Shane Ray that's taking over? Is that who it is?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so you get a lefty instead of a righty, which definitely doesn't help most of the Oakland players. It helps one of your favorite players for Oakland, but not most of them, because as a whole, this team not very good against lefties at all. One of the worst in the league. They still don't strike out a lot, so this is a pitcher you can't play on any side anyway, so we're not going to go too much into that. But if you're playing this middle slate, you got Scott Kazmir is going to have to be probably your top option. I mean, it looks like that second game, Houston-Baltimore's got some weather concerns, and you've got 2 guys there that are in play as well, but we'll get to those in a second. So Oakland-Detroit, like we said, minus 151 favorite and an 8-run total. If I'm playing this slate, I mean, I guess you're going to just stack most of the teams. I assume you'd see Detroit probably be a lower owned stack, I guess, out of the 4, just because they're facing the best pitcher on the board. And, you know, they hit lefties well, though, so I think certainly all those guys in play. If you find yourself a slate where you can get this in the late game, I think Miguel Cabrera is probably going to be one of your best options there, of course. Yeah. Outside of that, I mean, Ben Zobrist, I know you love him. He's facing off against a lefty now, $4,400 on DraftKings. Second base or outfield eligibility, always love that about him. He's got that flexibility there. So for me, I would probably just be targeting him, and I guess you get to see who else is going to be in the lineup. Maybe your Josh Fegley. I think you mentioned him this morning on the other pod. Yep. Nobody else for Oakland I really feel any confidence in, even on a really small slate like this.
Yeah, no one I feel great about, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the other side, Detroit, seems like all the bats are in play. All of them hit lefties pretty well. You got, if you want your cheap guys, you got your Jose Iglesias. Whoever's going to be leading off, if it's a lefty, it should be Rajai Davis. He'll probably be a really popular play on that middle slate there. And then take your pick with guys like Yoenis Cespedes and JD Martinez. You're probably going to err on the side of JD Martinez, I would assume. But I guess that with that being said, that you could probably get a lower owned guy in Cespedes as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. He's going to be really low owned, even in a small slate.
Yeah, I mean, he always seems to fly under the radar, and he's not very consistent, but he's that guy that can throw up those random double dong days. So certainly in play there. Outside of that, next up you have Houston at Baltimore. And Colin McHugh against Ubaldo Jimenez. 2 guys who can be good, but 2 guys who aren't consistently good. 8.5 run total. McHugh a small favorite in this one. And with it being in Camden, obviously there's it's more of a hitter's park than a pitcher's park. You don't feel great about playing either one of these guys, but especially if you're playing that middle slate on DraftKings, you got to play 2 pitchers. There's only 3 available, so you're not finding any way to go lower owned or have any sort of differentiation there. I mean, you're best served just picking one of these guys and throwing them with Kazmir, because you're obviously not going to be playing both guys from that, especially with the higher total. So I guess if I got to pick one, it'd probably be McHugh, just because I think he's got the higher upside. And Ubaldo Jimenez, his swing and strike rate really low this year. He's really not fooling anybody, and I think that he's a lot more likely to completely implode than Colin McHugh. Yeah,
I agree for sure.
And then as you look at batters, I mean, you can stack both sides of this one. George Springer's probably going to be my favorite play of either side there. $4,800 on DraftKings. He's going to be your biggest upside option. Guys like Adam Jones, of course, in play. But really this middle slate, it's just going to come down to who you can get in the lineup that's going to be low owned, because all the big bats are going to be high owned. None of the pitchers expensive. So enjoy yourself on that middle weird 2-game slate. I won't be playing much of it. Maybe a single GPP entry with a stack. But that's going to be about it for me.
Yeah, same here. I like Chris Davis a little bit as a GPP play, but like you said, he's probably going to be pretty heavily owned, especially because of his third base eligibility on DraftKings.
Yeah, definitely with that. So, yeah, that's your short, sweet analysis for the middle slate. Pretty much just throw your darts, make your bullets, and try to find the guys that no one else is going to have, and maybe stack the bottom of some orders there instead of the top. Maybe go like 4 through 8 4-7, 4-9, depending on what site you're playing on, something like that. That's really the only way you're going to be able to be different from the crowd because everyone's going to be on the same guys.
Yep.
All right, let's move on here to the night slate where, like we said, there's only 4 games, but there are a couple good pitching options. You've got, first off, Max Scherzer is facing off against the Cubs and John Lester. He's really expensive. He's $11,100 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, and on FanDuel he's $11,800. So you're paying a big price tag for this guy, but he's also in a 6.5 run total. But he's a very, very marginal favorite. It's almost a pick 'em here against John Lester, and you don't feel great paying almost $12K for a guy that's barely even a favorite at all. So really, what you're looking at here is trying to find yourself. If you're going Max Scherzer, you're gonna have to get a ton of value. But I think for me, Max Scherzer is just going to be a GPP option due to his price and not being a big favorite here.
Yeah, it makes it tough with that massive price, especially with what Lester, Greinke. I don't even mind Lance Lynn, really. Garrett Richards. All these guys are significantly cheaper than him and are pretty solid options. I mean, you can even look at Andrew Kashner in this one for $7,700 in GPPs. I mean, that's a steal of a price against an Angels team that really hasn't been hitting very well. Obviously not a favorite, but as a GPP play, it's hard to do much better than that on this kind of short slate.
Yeah, I'm with you. And he's only $8,100 on FanDuel, so I think he's in play definitely too. But if I gotta have one pitcher, which obviously you do on FanDuel, if you gotta have your first, if you're a catch games, you're gonna get your top option, then see if you can afford another top option.
Yep.
It's got to be Zach Greinke. I don't think it's close. I know you agree there. He's the biggest. I think he's the biggest favorite. Yeah, he's by far the biggest favorite. -195, 6.5 run total. Atlanta, yes, better against righties and lefties, but this is a team that's just bad on both sides right now.
Yeah.
Just really not a team that I'm going to be targeting with my offense at all. And, yeah, I mean, it's going to be Zach Greinke and then see who else you could fit right there, it seems.
Yeah, that's the way I'm approaching it, too.
All right, so as we're looking at these games, we'll go I guess we'll go game by game from these late ones because we've got a lot of time. So Washington, Chicago, we already kind of touched on Max Scherzer. He's got big upside, as you know, with the big strikeout rate. Chicago strikes out a ton against righties. John Lester, a guy that's in play. I mean, Washington, it's kind of a misconception. People are stacking a lot of Washington bets. They're not hitting particularly well. You mentioned it earlier. Obviously, Bryce Harper is, but that's a lefty-lefty matchup. And Lester wasn't great in his last start, but starting to get it going from his early season struggles. So really, this would be a game I'm not trying to see very much of either way. I think the only way I'm playing hitters from this game, obviously you're getting Harper in tournaments, but for me, I think it's going to be, if I'm playing a bunch of tournament lineups, which is probably what tonight's going to come to for me, I'm probably going to stack either side of this game just to be different because both these pitchers are going to be owned. And, if you go and get yourself a Cubs stack that goes off against Scherzer, that's a great way to set yourself apart.
Yeah, definitely. And they got a couple decent matchups against him. I mean, Montero's been having a pretty nice last couple weeks. Rizzo is always good against righties. I mean, he's a pretty strong play at 4,300 today on DraftKings. I think he's under 4,000 on FanDuel. I mean, the Cubs are definitely an interesting GPP stack for me, for sure. Obviously, Scherzer's not an ideal guy to stack against, but with a 4-game slate, like you mentioned, that's the kind of stack you have to be really differentiated.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the Washington side, of course, for the same reasons, you could stack that side. But outside of Bryce Harper, despite the lefty-lefty matchup, really no one I'm going on my way to target. Maybe Ian Desmond, because there's not a lot of shortstop options. He does have big-time upside. Now that he's hitting second in the order, you got to love that. But really no one else jumping off the page at all. All right, next up, Arizona at St. Louis. This one, you already mentioned Lance Lynn. Josh Collmenter on the other side. Obviously, Collmenter, the much cheaper pitcher if you're going to target one of these two guys. 7.5 run total. Lynn, as expected, -165 favorite. So he's an interesting option. Really bumped up his strikeout rate this year, but he's also been really inconsistent. You look at his last 6 starts even. 4, 30, 9, 30, 27, 4. Last one against KC. Pretty much everyone's struggling against KC these days. So Lance Lynn, a high upside guy, but really volatile. I think that he makes for an interesting option tonight against the Diamondbacks team that's a little bit better against lefties than they are against righties. So as far as guys with big upside, I think that you said Kashner, and I agree there, but I think that Lance Lynn's going to be a similar type of play that a little bit risky, but he's got some big-time upside and should be under-owned tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Both of those guys are interesting GPP plays for sure. As far as hitters go, I mean, there's not a lot I love on either side of this game, really. I mean, obviously, Collmenter's nothing special, but I don't know. The Cardinals are one of those teams where like they're so balanced. You're almost better off like actually stacking them and getting a bunch of their players in the lineup rather than trying to pick out like. I mean, Matt Holliday's having a nice season hitting, but he hasn't really shown any power yet. Carpenter is one of those guys that I mean, he's up to what 6 home runs on the season or so now, but he's not a guy that has big games really for you. So if you're playing GPPs, it's really hard to just narrow it down to which Cardinals you want to take. I do like Jason Hayward quite a bit tonight, though. He's probably my one guy that stands out a little bit for them if he's sitting near the top of the order. I feel pretty good about him in that lefty-righty matchup against Cole Mentor. Carpenter's obviously the strongest cash game play there. On the Arizona side, I mean, Goldschmidt, obviously, solid GPP play. Outside of that, there's no one that I'm really super excited about. I mean, we're looking at guys like A.J. Pollock's their 2-hitter, not a guy I want to take in a righty-righty matchup against Lynn, despite him hitting pretty well lately, actually. Maybe Enciarte is a lefty-righty matchup. He's usually hitting leadoff against righties. He could be in play, but at 3,300 on DraftKings, I think he's 2,900 on FanDuel. He's probably going to be decently owned on a 4-game slate, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's going to be a whole lot of that, I think. So, interesting things with these, like we said, you're going to try to find you got your obvious plays. Guys like Matt Carpenter are going to be huge owned, especially in cash games tonight. I think Hayward's a great call, especially if he's hitting near the top of the order. And another way to differentiate yourself is to leave a little bit of money on the table. I don't know if that's the way to do it in cash games necessarily tonight, but especially in GPPs, getting guys like Hayward. Don't worry about how much salary you have left. Try to find your guys that are in good spots that you think will be lower owned, and stick those guys in. Because if you're losing $1,000, $1,500 off your salary on a 4-game slate, people will have this misconception you got to spend every dollar, and then you end up coming off of guys that you really liked that you wanted to play these guys and you can't play them because you ended up paying up because you felt like you had to. So definitely keep that in mind. Especially
in baseball, it's probably the least important sport to use all of your salary because, like with basketball and football, you're kind of looking at it, and usually if you're paying $1,500 more for someone, they're legitimately have a better range of outcomes with the floor and the ceiling and stuff like that. In baseball, I mean, everybody's floor is full, like -1 on FanDuel, 0 on DraftKings. Everyone's ceiling is pretty massive. I mean, we've seen guys like Corey Spangenberg hit 2 home runs and a double in the same game when, I mean, he wasn't in a particularly good matchup or anything. He's done almost nothing since then.
Yep.
So when you're leaving money on the table in baseball, you're almost better off just taking the matchups that you want because, I mean, they have the same range of outcomes for the most part. So, like, just spending up from, like, say, I'm trying to think of someone who's, like, a good outfield play today or something. Like, it's really hard to like Paul Goldschmidt a ton at first base today because he's facing Lynn. He's got a massive price where you can take somebody in a much better matchup like I like Matt Adams a decent amount today, for instance, at 4,200 for St. Louis against Cole Mentor.
Yeah.
You can leave that money on the table and feel pretty good about it and not have to worry about it. I mean, Matt Adams could easily produce the same thing as Paul Goldschmidt, if not a better day today, where, like, if you're doing the same thing in football where it's like, I'm trying to think of a decent example that kind of compares a little bit. But if you're taking a fringe like running back that his best day is going to be he averages 4.2 yards per carry on 25 carries or whatever versus a guy like, I don't know, LaShawn McCoy or whatever who has massive like 200-yard, 2-touchdown upside. It's just a huge difference between football and baseball.
Yeah. I mean, first analogy I thought of when you said McCoy was when McCoy and Sproles were both in Philly. You know, you figure, yeah, Sproles has upside if he breaks one for a touchdown. But he doesn't really have upside because he doesn't get touches. Whereas in baseball, all these guys are going to get the same amount of touches, except for
exactly.
Guys. So
yeah,
I mean, opportunities there for everyone. All it takes is one big swing to pay that off. So definitely a good piece of advice to employ with your GPP strategy moving forward, and mainly on small slates. But I mean, obviously on big slates too. That's really going to differentiate yourself. You leave some money on the table on a 10 or 12 game slate right there. So,
yep, absolutely.
All right, 2 more games on here. We'll help you out with these. We've got San Diego at the Los Angeles Angels. We already mentioned Andrew Cashner a couple times. Garrett Richards. Both these guys are interesting options. The Angels, like you said, not hitting well. I mean, they're down there with the Phillies as one of the worst in the league against right-handed pitching, which is really surprising. But they also have some guys that can put up some points in a hurry. Obviously, you got your Mike Trout. You got Cole Calhoun now in the lefty-righty matchup. Albert Pujols, if he gets it going. Eric Ibar, he's probably not going to hit any more home runs anytime soon, like that one he got the other day. But he's the guy that can get on base, steal bases, score runs. So they've got talent top to bottom. Same with San Diego, but neither team producing at a high level. So that's what's going to be difficult about this one. Both pitchers, it seems like, are in play because they both have nice upside. But at the same time, really the hitters on both sides. I think these will be two interesting stacks. Maybe an interesting way to go in this one in tournaments would be, get yourself a couple mini stacks of both sides of this one, since people will be using these pitchers a lot in GPPs. If this game ends up 6-5, 5-4 even, and the other games are all low scoring, I mean, you got yourself all of the biggest game.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's hard to really love either side of that game as far as hitters go, but there's some decent upside there. I mean, the Angels have looked a little better hitting-wise. I mean, Pujols has gotten it going a little bit. Trout's been much, much better over the last 2 or 3 weeks. A couple other guys in that lineup like Calhoun and stuff that they have upside. I mean, we never expected the Angels to be as bad as they've been this season, so it's not outside the realm of possibility for them to have a couple big days coming up here soon. So as far as GPPs go, I think you can feel pretty strongly that you can go after either of these teams on a 4-game slate where, I mean, there's really a ton of really good pitchers. There's only one pitcher on this slate that you really want to attack at all, which is Colemanter for Arizona. Outside of that, I mean, you're in pretty good shape as far as going after whoever, because everyone's facing a good pitcher, so you're not at a massive disadvantage.
Yeah, and as you're looking at these guys, just to look a little bit deeper, Andrew Kashner's got fairly significant splits from road to home, much better at home, obviously, at Petco. And Garrett Richards, the opposite, where he's, opposite for tonight, I should say. Much better at home, where he has a 1.74 ERA and a .87 whip, whereas on the road, 4.01 ERA, 1.34 whip. So, if you want to look at it that way, you're deciding between the two. I mean, that right there tells you want Garrett Richards. But like we said, you got to find a way to differentiate yourself. And I honestly do think this is going to be a really low-scoring slate. We're going to see some really crazy low scores getting in and double-ups and GPPs especially, with all these good pitchers on the mound. So I wouldn't be surprised to see no team score more than 5 runs tonight.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, last game we've got here for you. We'll try to give you whatever analysis we can on this last one. Zach Greinke, you already mentioned, he's your cash games pitcher. He's the best pitcher on tonight's slate outs. He's up there talent-wise, obviously, with Scherzer, but price considered, he's got to be your top option tonight. $9,500 on DraftKings and $9,900 on FanDuel. Almost $2,000 less than Scherzer on both places. If they're similar prices, maybe you prefer Scherzer a little bit, but because he's got the higher strikeout upside. But I mean, with that big a price tag, I don't think it's really that close. You got to get Greinke in your cash games. FanDuel, it's a no-brainer. Just put him in there and move on. DraftKings, you got to pick who you're going to pair with him. So with that being said, you got Alex Wood on the mound, a bad lefty, got scratched with a stomach virus the other day. Luckily, we all got Eric Stoltz instead, so all of us who had hitters in that game were thrilled about that one. But you also got some lefty bats in this Dodger lineup that are going to have a lefty-lefty matchup now. Adrian Gonzalez, obviously much better against righties, but he can still hit lefties. Jock Peterson's the guy now in lefty-lefty who hasn't been great against lefties, but he's obviously still got power. So, I have zero faith in Alex Wood. I think it's more likely that he walks 4 or 5 batters and doesn't make it out of the 4th inning than him giving up, 8 or 9 runs and getting crushed. But at the same time, I think that the Dodgers will be the team that I'll probably be targeting the most tonight because Alex Wood is, I think, by far the worst pitcher on the slate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of guys you got to like against a lefty for the Dodgers. I mean, Scott Van Slyke's probably going to be in the lineup at 3,300 on DraftKings, near minimum on FanDuel. I mean, that's probably going to be one of the more popular stacks, you would think. Honestly, Atlanta might be the most underused team today because there's just no one on Atlanta that you really want to draft. I mean, at least against Scherzer and Lester or whatever, there's a couple guys on Washington and Chicago that you feel pretty good about drafting and can get excited about. On Atlanta, it's I mean, Nick Markakis is probably the most interesting guy, I would say, outside of maybe Freddie Freeman. But I mean, outside of Freeman and Markakis, even there's really no one out there for Atlanta that I want to draft. So that's probably going to be an interestingly low-owned stack. With Jace Peterson hitting leadoff again at 2,900. So maybe I'll try tossing a couple of those in there and seeing what I can do with that. That's probably an easy way potentially get Greinke and Scherzer on DraftKings. Because almost all the Atlanta guys are cheap. Even Markakis and Freeman are pretty low owned because they're facing Greinke today on DraftKings. I mean, Freeman's only 3,700, Markakis 3,300. Outside of that, basically everyone's under that. So that's going to be an interesting stack for me for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to go. Obviously, when there's short slates, you got your guys that everyone's going to be on, and that's Zach Greinke. So the ultimate contrarian play in those situations is always going to be playing the other team against them. And even maybe a way you could go is maybe do a couple mini stacks, like whatever your favorite team to stack is. Stack that half of that team, maybe 4 on DraftKings, and then get 4 more Atlanta players with that. Alternate that in and out. I mean, you got to get creative tonight on this 4-game slate. I think it's going to be fun to make some different kind of GPP lineups, and you can almost rest assured that the winning GPP lineup of most of these big tournaments is going to be a crazy lineup that you never would be playing if there was 8 to 12 games on tonight's slate. But it's that's what's going to make it even more fun. We know we like these short slates for GPPs. They're going to be rough for cash games, but I think you can still build a solid lineup because I don't think you're going to need to score a whole hell of a lot to get yourself in the money tonight. So just get yourself a good pitcher and some safety everywhere else, maybe.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's going to be so many good pitchers, or there's so many good pitchers out here that you can probably differentiate yourself a little bit by giving up some hitting and taking the top guys. So I think Scherzer comes back into play on this really short slate because of that. Because there are a few decent cheap options out there, and like you said, everybody's going to be facing good pitchers. And so taking the cheap options and talking about like what we talked about before as far as everyone gets 4 opportunities in this game. I mean, if you're taking 4 at-bats against Scherzer, I mean, you don't have a like highly expected run production there anyway. So taking cheap guys anyway probably isn't going to hurt your expected value a ton. So I agree. I think I'm going to be loading up on pitchers and just throwing GPP darts at different hitters and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting creative is going to be setting you apart this way. Maybe even just go like the mini stacks, 2-2-2-2 or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe find it a bunch of different ways. But either way, hopefully we helped you out a little bit here with some ideas, some good plays, some strategy. And if you like what we've been doing, check out our YouTube channel, subscribe to it. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe, and check out all of our great content, written articles, and everything for tonight's slate as well. And we'll see you guys again tomorrow.